All three heads of these schools said that calls for Jewish genocide are not against their free speech policies.
If you support free speech, you have to support it with just as much enthusiasm when you don't like the speech. Otherwise, you're just as big a part of the problem.
Your ability to, say, criticize people for protesting in the name of Palestine hinges on that they are also allowed to protest in the name of Palestine.
Exactly.
It's like you can't take away one without the other. Hunter Biden has been indicted on 9 tax charges in California, including 3 felonies and 6 misdemeanors. The indictment alleges that Hunter Biden spent millions on an extravagant lifestyle, including $683,212 in payments to various women. Another nearly $400,000 on clothing and accessories, and just under $200,000 on adult entertainment, rather than paying his tax bills. I think the most interesting thing there is you had to separate payments to various women in adult entertainment on your taxes. Like, what?
Yeah. I think this is going to be their opportunity to say, hey, Joe, just step down gracefully, and then your son gets off on these charges with a slap on the wrist, some small fines, whatever, and you guys just kind of go away. And then they can paint this picture like Joe Biden stepped down to go spend time with his family. Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey, and this is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. What's going on, bro? How you doing?
I'm fantastic. Glad to be here. Getting ready to talk some shit.
Oh boy, I'm still looking up this caffeine situation. I just can't believe that, like, they put 390 milligrams of caffeine in the charged lemonade at Panera Bread. I don't even know why they would do that. Like, why would you put that much caffeine in anything that's why in that context? Like, why?
Probably just feeding it to their employees for extra effort.
Fair enough.
Mandatory charged lemonade at the beginning of every shift.
That'll do it.
All right, well, want to get started here on some climate passports. So it seems as though the days of us peasants being able to freely travel are coming to an end. Many climate cultists, including Paloma Zapata, the CEO of Sustainable Travel International, are starting to support the idea of quote-unquote carbon passports. CNN states these passports would assign yearly emissions limits to travelers. Between this idea, outlawing gas-powered cars, and mandating the installation of kill switches in cars, how concerned are you with the state of freedom of mobility?
That's wild. Yeah, I forgot about the kill switch situation. It's like, I think within the next few years, they have to be mandatorily built into all American cars. That's wild.
Mm-hmm.
That's so dangerous. I don't know, like, the things that are happening right now to limit individual freedoms and mobility, people should be freaking the fuck out. But I think it's just happening so slowly and it's not affecting everybody's sort of everyday that they're not alarmed yet. But people like you and I are going, this is wild. This makes no sense. With this climate agenda thing, I guess I see this in sort of two ways. I see it from like an ideological perspective, but then also like a pragmatic perspective. From the ideological side, like you said, it's being used to limit individual freedoms constantly. And that just seems to be, it's just very much like a veiled attempt to control the population. But what bothers me about this kind of stuff is these are rules for you and I. These are rules for poor, middle class, and middle upper. But not really wealthy, not political elite. They don't have to pay attention to the rules. You know what I mean? Like, they live by a different standard. And, it's interesting. I think when people with money can do things that we can't do, you and I recognize, we go, okay, well, we're playing a game of Monopoly, and they have more money, so they can buy the nice places. That makes sense, right?
And they have hotels on every property.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, yeah, like, we're getting taxed just for going by. So that tracks. But with the climate thing, what's interesting is what makes one man more important than another when it comes to climate. So this is going to become a really interesting, like, if this does get implemented, I think you've got a really interesting sort of dichotomy or disparity between the two to look at, because people are going to say, like, why are you more important? Is it because you have money that you don't have to worry about the environment and I do? So I think you've got a really big issue there. I think that'll be interesting to see that play out. And I mean, I did some math on Trudeau's travel. This was a few months ago, but over his entire tenure as prime minister, assuming he makes it to 2025, by my math, he's going to travel over 1,000. I believe it's 1 million kilometers, but it might have been 1 million miles. But I think it was 1 million kilometers in the air. So, like, obviously, these people don't have to pay attention to the rules. Just people like you and I, which I think is, obviously a pretty big issue. I mean, kind of to that point. Anytime society implements a law that is just a financial penalty, which, these people will be able to pay for more access or buy their own planes, for fuck's sake, that is just a rule for the poor and middle class.
Well, talking to your privilege point about how there's rules for certain people, things like this, especially with the climate agenda, always remind me of a bit from George Orwell's Animal Farm, which is a allegory for a communist revolution. And essentially the propagandist, his name is Squealer in the book. He, at one point, after the pigs get caught hoarding milk and apples from the rest of the animals, he says, "Comrades, you do not imagine, I hope, that we pigs are doing this in a spirit of selfishness and privilege. Many of us actually dislike milk and apples. I dislike them myself. Our sole object in taking these things is to preserve our health. Milk and apples, this has been proven by science, comrades, contain substances absolutely necessary to the well-being of a pig. We pigs are brain workers. The whole management and organization of this farm depends on us. Day and night, we are watching over your welfare. It is for your sake that we drink the milk and eat those apples." And I think about that in the same thing of this travel where it's just like, oh, I don't want to travel. You think I like traveling this much or going on vacation for 50% of my time in office? No, I have to do these things because it's
better for you. Yeah, I'm looking out for you, your best interests. Fuck, that's wow. That's a really good point. So more from the pragmatic side, though, this is sort of a flawed concept in general. And the reason I say that is because very recently, Virgin Atlantic did a flight from Heathrow to JFK. So they flew across the pond using a sustainable aviation fuel. So it was basically made from waste product. And the carbon emission was under 30% of regular output. So we've already got tools in place that we can use, and we can scale those up very quickly because it's waste product, so that we could be limiting our carbon footprint by travel by a substantial margin as it is. And not to mention, like, you refine that a little more, give us 5-10 more years, then we're traveling on hydrogen and we're using battery. So there's just actually no good reason for this. Like, it is such an overreach on individual freedom, because when you look at it from a logical perspective on why they're applying this, well, we can refute all that unequivocally. So at the end of the day, yeah, this is just a grab for more personal freedom. It's a grab for do more for the collective, not for yourself, which, as you and I know, is such a dangerous path.
Yeah, man. And to put it into perspective as to how strict these policies need to be and how much freedoms they're going to take away, I've read False Alarm by Bjorn Lomborg, which anybody that is interested in this topic, I would highly suggest going and doing so. But there was this excerpt that I found from it that puts things into perspective a little bit, where he says, "One way to get a sense of the magnitude of the Paris Accords comes from the UN itself. The UN finds that to get on the trajectory to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we need to cut emissions 7.6% more every single year throughout the 2020s. This is more than what we realized in 2020, which only delivered a 4 to 6% reduction. So, in the harshest period of lockdowns, we cut emissions by 4 to 6%, and the UN says we need to actually do more than that every single year." So he goes on to say, so what the UN is really saying is that 2020 should have been worse, and then we need twice as much impact in 2021, and then we need twice as much impact again in 2022. And when we reach 2030, we will have 11 times the hardships we endured in 2020. It simply defies any realistic belief that we will be able to achieve or indeed even want anything like what is being suggested here.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. I mean, when you break it down, this whole thing is just such a charade, right? And I use that word a lot lately because it just feels like that's what we're living in constantly. And it was something I read the other day. I actually wrote about it. They do not have an agreed upon formula to test the temperature of the planet, to reference it against the 1.5 degrees for the Paris Agreement. We don't even have that. So that's the most basic formula that you need in place to be talking all this shit from your soapbox. So for me, it's just... For me, obviously, you and I look at this and we can poke a bunch of holes in it. But from that, just even not having that in place, how does anyone take them seriously? Like, I just don't understand it.
Do you know how they forecast what they think the global temperatures will be in the future?
No idea.
So what they do is they take these models. It's the CMIP models. And so they run essentially computer software going, here's the patterns for the last 50, 100 years, whatever, forecast that out if we continue on this trajectory. But 3 of their models got completely different results. There was about a 4-degree disparity between each model. And then what they did was they just took those 3 models, which are all obviously wrong if they're spitting out different information, and then they just averaged it out. And they were like, this is what we're going to be. So that's, dude, the modeling even on what the temperature is going to be for in the future, let alone how we measure it, all of this kind of stuff, it's just flawed science left, right, and center. And then from a financial perspective, this is also eye-opening, because in False Alarm, he talks about New Zealand. So he says, when New Zealand did an in-depth analysis of how much it would cost to meet their climate goals, here's what they found. Cutting 50% of New Zealand's emissions by 2050 would cost the nation $19 billion annually by 2050, which is a lot for a nation its size. To put this in perspective, that's about what the government now spends on its entire education and healthcare system. If they want to reach net zero, it will cost them more than $61 billion annually, or 16% of their GDP. That is more than New Zealand today spends on social security, welfare, health, education, police, courts, defense, environment, and every other part of their government combined. To achieve their promise, New Zealanders will need to accept an escalating carbon tax that ends up so phenomenally high that it would be equivalent to a gasoline tax of $8.33 per gallon. And even the 16% GDP cost relies on a fairy tale assumption that every single policy will be enacted as efficiently as possible. Bearing in mind the evidence that costs double in the real world, it could be 32% or more. If we imagine each New Zealander having to pay an equal share of this amount every year, the cost would be equivalent to at least $12,800 for every single New Zealander every year. If the policies are done badly, as they have been done so far across the globe, the cost per person would go beyond even $25,000 per year.
So it's completely untenable. There's just no way to get this done. And it kind of begs the question, like, why? Like, so you look at the climate agenda, you look at COVID, you look at a lot of these things, and they're very much control mechanisms and how they're applied, right? So when you think about this, and you and I run the numbers here, it becomes really obvious that they can't actually accomplish the goal. So what is it then? You know, is it because there's a couple ways to look at this. Are they trying to do this so that they actually mitigate the climate issue as best they can? Is that maybe what it is? I don't think so, but maybe that's part of it, right? Or is it that they continue to apply these principles, strategies, policies, whatever, so that they can take as much money away from people as possible, so they become more and more dependent on the system, and they end up doing more and more stuff sort of for the collective? I don't really see it any other way. Like, what are your thoughts? Why do you think they're doing this?
So you can put the two thoughts in place. So the green movement you could think about as a revolution, which it is, and you can think about the measures that they are putting in place as kind of tyrannical, dictatorial, all of this kind of stuff. So I would go back to Orwell in this line of thinking, which one does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard the revolution. One creates the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship.
Right.
And so I think that's what's going on here, because
power play.
Yeah. And I think, you know, this doesn't mean every single climate scientist or media reporter or any of these kind of things are in on it and that they want this control. I just believe they're useful idiots from a very few people that, you know, give their funding. And yeah, so I think all of this climate stuff is merely a mechanism for control. Yeah. I don't even think there's
any real intention to worry about the climate. I actually don't even, to be quite honest with you, like what I've read and sort of the scientific support going the other way really actually makes me believe more than anything that we have very little control over what's going to happen anyway. It's very cyclical. Like, I know that we can mitigate and make some changes and alterations, but the Earth seems to have its own formula for how it's going to sustain itself. And I do know that we make an impact. I understand that, but I genuinely think it's a single digit percentage. Whereas, you know, if you ask the UN, it's 100%, which is wild. That doesn't make any sense, as we know that the climate changes on its own anyway. But that's actually what I think it is. So I don't think, the reason I say that is because there has to be I believe there's got to be some impact that we make that they can identify to sort of make their claim. You know what I mean?
For sure. There's no cost-free issue being put in place. Like even with, say, for instance, us, like anytime you do something, there's going to be consequences to it. So those are consequences, but there's this fairy tale idea that we can live in a world free of consequences.
That's right. Yeah. Which is preposterous, because everything they're trying to implement just has a different set of consequences, which are actually far more like, they're substantially worse for humans.
Yeah. The quote unquote, I mean, we've been seeing this, all over the last few years, even The cure seems to be worse than the disease.
Right. Yeah.
Anyways, all right, let's move on here to Hunter Biden.
Yes, the troubled young man.
Yeah, so Hunter Biden has been indicted on 9 tax charges in California, including 3 felonies and 6 misdemeanors. The charges are related to at least $1.4 million in taxes that Hunter Biden owed between 2016 and 2019. The indictment alleges that Hunter Biden spent millions on an extravagant lifestyle, including $683,212 in payments to various women, another nearly $400,000 on clothing and accessories, and just under $200,000 on adult entertainment, rather than paying his tax bills. The charges come after the collapse of a plea deal over the summer that would have spared him jail time. If convicted, Hunter Biden could face up to 17 years in prison. I think the most interesting thing there is you had to separate payments to various women in adult entertainment on your taxes. Like what? Yeah, you're like I don't have just a category for debauchery. I have multiple.
Yeah, like I don't understand. Yeah, dude, you could have just done so many things to set up some sort of like racketeering front to cover this. Like, what are you doing? He's just brazen about it. Doesn't even give a fuck. I mean, I see this as kind of an interesting. I have a bit of an interesting look on this where I actually think this is mostly charged by the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you why. So these 9 charges, in addition to the other tons he has in the gun issue he's got, these 9 charges come from California. California is like the most Democratic state there is. California or New York, toss up, cool. But basically you're splitting hairs, right? So you think about this. Why would they give him these 9 charges? I think 3 were criminal, 6 were misdemeanor, for this tax evasion, essentially, right? And he could face 17 years in prison. Now, why would they do this if they're Democrats? This is the same week that Biden is actually looking at a formal review for an impeachment. So I think that they're kind of going, all right, let's look at all the ingredients in the bowl. We got a troubled son who's a crackhead, gun-carrying, he pimps. I don't know what he's doing with all the women. Cool, great. That's a lot of money for women, Jesus. Anyway, so you've got this son that's basically a troubled young man into a bunch of bad shit. You've got a president that is 100% compromised. Doesn't matter how you look at it, he's compromised, right? And then when you look at him in the polls, he's losing to Trump over the last few months in every single poll. Even Democratic polls he's losing, right? So you kind of look at that and then you see his impeachment thing coming up and you're like, okay, if I'm a Democrat, I'm going, Biden can't win, but he keeps saying he's going to keep running. So how do we get him to step aside? And maybe now is their opportunity. So I think they push these charges. I think what's going to happen is Biden is not going to get impeached. That never actually happens. Like he might get impeached. He won't be convicted of anything. It'll go away. That's how that stuff always works, right? It's just nonsense. It's just creative nonsense court to make everybody look bad. Nothing will actually happen to him. But I think this is going to be their opportunity to say, hey, Joe, your son's in a lot of trouble here. Even in a Democratic state, we can make this go away. Why don't you go spend time with your family? This is now your opportunity to step down gracefully, not get impeached, or, not be convicted or whatever, however that works in that court. And then your son, gets off on these charges with a slap on the wrist, some small fines, whatever, and you guys just kind of go away. And then they can paint this picture like Joe Biden stepped down to go spend time with his family, right? And now they've got the opportunity to sort of implement another Democratic candidate. Because when you look at the polls, while the other 2 people they talked about running were Kamala Harris and Clinton, who both ranked worse than Biden somehow, if you put in any other Democrat, like literally they like a non-named Democrat, they will beat Trump in the polls. So I think they're looking at this going, look, if we want to win or have a chance at winning in 2024, we have to get rid of Biden somehow. Sure, we can bank on the fact that he's going to have an accident because at any time it could happen, but you don't really want to see that happen to a guy. Like no matter what, like he's not evil enough. Well, you know what? I'm not really. Yeah, I don't wish death on people. Generally, not my approach. So they can bank on the fact that something bad might happen to him. That's kind of risky. This is kind of a sure thing. You got Hunter up on 45 years of charges between the gun charges and the tax evasion charges. You have control of the Democratic courts in California, rather, so you can sort of dictate how that goes. And now with this Biden impeachment thing, you kind of push him out this way. I think it's the easiest, most amicable way for everybody to sort of break apart, you know what I mean? And they can still save face.
From what I understand, the plea deal got squashed because a judge came in and essentially said, No, there's no way you guys aren't charging him on this. There's no way you guys aren't prosecuting and essentially mandated that the government prosecute him.
Yes, because it got a little bit of, people saw it. It got some light.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
some public scrutiny.
Right. Yeah, exactly. If it wasn't in the spotlight at all, it would have been fine.
Yeah.
So someone basically raised the red flag.
Right. Okay. And two, I think the most revealing thing from that indictment was everybody knows about Biden's ties with Ukraine, with Burisma, the energy company over there, where this is directly from the indictment. Burisma agreed to pay the defendant an annual salary of approximately $1 million to be paid in monthly disbursements. In March 2017, Burisma reduced his compensation to approximately $500,000 a year. So within a month of his dad being taken out of vice presidency, his salary of this company dropped in half. And you're like, how is this not blatantly obvious that it was a pay-to-play kind of game scheme going on here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a bit of problem too that happened for, there's a bit of trouble as well for Biden, Joe and Hunter, because something just got found the other day. It was not a big payment, but a consistent payment was going to Joe Biden every single month from Hunter's company. Even though he's like, I have nothing to do with his companies, but now they've got a paper trail being like, hey, you were getting paid every single month, dude. The big
10% for the big guy.
Yeah, like he's in some shit here. And I think they're seeing the writing on the wall. And I think it's the easiest exit and the only way really to save the Democratic Party, to give themselves a chance to run with an opportunity to win in 2024. Because if it's Biden, game's over. No chance.
Yeah. I mean, who do you think they'll throw in there if that happens? I mean, you got probably Newsom.
I think Michelle Obama's still top of the list for me.
Really?
Yeah, Newsom's actually not a bad choice. I think he's a dangerous person. We'll see how well he pulls. I think Obama would pull a lot better. Here's the thing. I think a lot of moderates and people on the fence are actually sick of how Democrats are running the country. Because if you look at everything, you look at immigration, you look at the economy, you take your pick. It's on fire, right? So, and you look at a lot of the policies that are in place and why things are on fire. It's the same thing that's happening in Canada, right? You kind of need... People may not want Trump, but you kind of need a Republican or a conservative approach to fix some of these mistakes. I think that Michelle Obama would be seen as more of a centered approach to fixing things, where Newsom is establishment. Like he's staunch left, like also coming from California, right?
See, I don't think the platform would change depending on what those people are in. I think the only thing that changes is the mask of the DNC, because the whole policy is for the DNC right now is Agenda 2030. It's the sustainable goals by UN, everything down from social to climate, all of this kind of stuff. So it's like, it's just which one of these people do you want to try to implement Agenda 2030?
Right. I don't think that they will change their agenda at the macro scale, but I think to convince people that you're doing the right thing, you have to put the right person in place. And I think they might lose too many people on the fence or too many moderates to someone like Gavin Newsom. I think. So that's why I think Obama, plus everybody's so fond of Barack Obama. Like he's like everybody's favorite, because they don't look at the actual policy and statistics, which is fine. If that's what you want. So he's got a lot of love from that community as well. So I think people would see him as a safe bet because he would also kind of be in the background. You know what I mean? So, I mean, it's like if Hillary wasn't so cold, people supported Bill. She's just not likable, but Michelle is. So I see that as like, let's put it this way. If the Democrats want to have the best chance to win the election in 2024, I think they put in Michelle Obama.
You don't think Chucky's bride is likable?
I think it's going to work, dude.
Yeah, man, it's wild to see, but I mean, yeah, which way that party will go. I look at it just like, yeah, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. The same policies are going to be shoved down your throat. It's just who's going to be more effective at doing them.
I don't disagree. I think they're a huge problem, and I think they need to be removed right now so that we can kind of correct course both here and there. But I think if I'm taking a pragmatic approach and not being, just not basically saying, hey, here's who I want to win, I think that's how they have their best chance.
All right, and last for the day here, the heads of Harvard, MIT, and Penn State were brought before Congress to be questioned about their universities turning into hotbeds of quote-unquote anti-Semitism, with pro-Palestinian mobs harassing Jewish students at the universities. All three heads of these schools said that calls for Jewish genocide are not against their free speech policies. What's your thoughts there?
Well, it's interesting. So one thing I kind of want to point out is a lot of the articles right now in the media are suggesting that free speech is the problem here because they suppressed free speech they've landed in this place where you're in these echo chambers, which I actually totally agree with. You know, when you take away free speech and you take away the opportunity for people to challenge your idea, then one idea always wins, the other one's suppressed. And who gets to pump those ideas through? You know, until now, these ideas have been really promoted by sort of this woke ideology, which has been democratic. That's been the Democratic Party. It's been the educational system. They've all been in lockstep, right? So as a result of them suppressing free speech, they have got themselves into a situation where they've got a weapon with these young kids. Now, this weapon has been consistently used against the Republican strategy, constantly. You know what I mean? Like Harvard is I forget the study, but they finished dead last in terms of free speech in the country. So they're the lowest in free speech, what people deem to be, you know, acceptable free speech within that community. So no one says they can speak their mind because they're worried about getting deplatformed or canceled or whatever. Obviously, it's a real problem there. In this particular case, what happened was the uncontrollable weapon that is this woke ideology, this woke mob at this level, these students on campus, they took an unpopular opinion. They went against what the institutions wanted, which is weird though, because you're seeing a lot of people.
I don't know. A lot of those institutions, the higher ups in there, those academics, you see what's coming out of a lot of these like notes or whatever, and they seem pretty pro-Palestine, a lot of these.
But the thing is, from the top down, you're looking at it, like the way I see it, it goes politics, then education, then the students, right? Politics, media, education, students, actually, if I'm going to use the four. The media is pro-Israel, 100%. Like they just are. Like you get the offshoots, whether you're right or left, they're pro-Israel, right? The government, it's interesting because they got to kind of walk the line. You know, you got Rashida Tlaib, you got a few people that are pushing back, but primarily they're pro-Israel. And they vetoed another vote the other day at the UN at the Security Council for a call for a ceasefire. Now, it's the UN, and I know it's just hall monitors and whatever, but out of the 15 countries, 13 voted in favor of the ceasefire, Britain abstained, and the US vetoed it, right? So they're really pushing for this Israel can fight the war, get the fuck out of their face kind of thing. So the government really is in support, and they're going to fund Israel. They're not going to fund the other side. So, well, humanitarian stuff, you know what I mean? So then the media obviously is pro-Israel. The thing is, the institutions, like these educational institutions, are pretty much an extension of the state. So they like 10-1 are Democrat versus Republican in terms of teachers. That's about the number. It might be even worse in these schools, I'm not sure. So this does go against their cohesive narrative as a group. So you'd always have them on the same page about everything, whether it was race, whether it was gender. They're always talking the same words all the time. They're just using, they're different outlets to pass the same message along. And in this particular case, I'm of the opinion that this fell apart. Now, here's the problem. And it really did, because they're at Congress right now. They're in Congress arguing about anti-Semitic speech.
Well, and the Penn president, Liz McGill,
stepped down.
Yeah, she
stepped down.
She resigned.
Yeah, and now they're pushing Harvard and the woman from MIT to step down as well. Now, they might not. They're it looks like Harvard is in the middle right now, and MIT is getting support from their board. To your point, they do support them. But the thing is, they've gone against the grain with this particular topic, but this shows them the power of this mob and what these people can do when you do suppress free speech. This is what happens. When you don't let ideas flourish and people talk, these are the kinds of things that are going to happen. But my problem right now is people on the right and people on the left are suggesting suppressing free speech as a solution. So that kind of leaves you in a bit of a funny spot.
Well, and this is where it's hilarious to see how people don't really have principles. They just have tribes that they adhere to, and they'll just, whatever narrative is helpful for their tribe at that moment is what they will go along with. Because I guarantee you, if every single one of those presidents were put in front of Congress and asked if cheers and chants for the genocide of, say, trans people or black people or whatever, if that was it instead of Jewish people,
yeah,
every single one of those presidents would have 110% said, yes, this goes against our code of conduct.
Absolutely.
And if those chants were happening, they would 100% shut them down. So as soon as they're for free speech, as long as that free speech is being pushed in a direction that they agree with.
Exactly.
These people. But then to your point too, you see conservatives and quote unquote freedom fighters and all this shit all of a sudden just completely turn around on their principles and sit there and go, yeah, I want these people to be censored. I want, you see what France is doing where they're, say, deporting certain people if they have if they protest in favor of Palestine, or hate speech laws essentially going into place about protesting Israel. And you go, who the fuck are we if we don't stand by our principles? And I just don't see anybody doing that anymore.
No, I mean, my opinion is this. If you support free speech, you have to support it with just as much enthusiasm when you don't like the speech. Otherwise, you're just as big a part of the problem.
Because your ability to, say, criticize people for protesting in the name of Palestine hinges on that they are also allowed to protest in the name of Palestine.
Exactly.
It's like you can't take away one without the other.
No, and I mean, when it comes to these presidents having to step down, I think that's nonsense. When it comes to mitigating this sort of at the campus level, if they're not... I understand that there are...
I will actually say I'm pretty glad to see these presidents start to have to step down and shit like this.
But I don't think they should have to because of free speech necessarily. I think they should let it all flourish. Let it go. Let it go. Like, you guys created a mess. You're not going to fix it by suppressing more. Let it go. Let it sort itself out. As long as no one's being violent, then I kind of draw the line.
But if over the last decade, those people had been pro-free speech, and then this was just a continuation on of those policies of saying, yep, we are here for free speech, and if that means protesting Israel or these harmful calls that we don't agree with, that's okay, because in the past we've also protected people's rights to say that there's only two genders or this or whatever it may be. But when they're pulling, it's the hypocrisy that's getting them fired. It's not the stance itself, because...
See, I disagree with you. I think they're getting fired for the stance, not the hypocrisy. You want them fired for the hypocrisy, which I agree with in a sense, but they're getting fired for the stance. They're getting specifically fired for the anti-Semitic stuff. They are getting fired for the stance. That's the thing, right? So for me, I don't agree with that. I don't agree that... I think they should be wiped out in terms of you do need a fresh board of people and maybe a new president that is going to allow free speech to flourish. So from a hypocritical perspective, I agree with you totally. But they are being let go because of anti-Semitism. So it's very particular in this issue, right? So
I think that's where a lot of the blowback came from, though, was the hypocrisy. Because I think if this was just a continuation of how they've been, I don't think it would have been a national news story.
See, I think because there's so much money and there's so much Jewish influence inside politics, inside the media, inside these corporations, inside the donors to these big universities, these D1 Ivy League schools, that's why I think this happened.
Yeah, could very well be right.
Because you saw the girl from UPenn step down, right? McGill from UPenn stepped down because Ackman, I think it was, threatened to pull $100 million in donations.
Damn.
So that was basically like, do or die for the school. That's a lot of... Now, I don't know. I say that, obviously. I don't know what the terms were on the money. I don't know if it was over X number of years or whatever, but it's a lot of money. And this woman's got to go, well, if I actually care about the students, this is such a significant amount of money, I have to step down. No big... So I get it. And you might actually see the same thing happen from other donors at these other schools at Harvard and MIT to sort of force their hand to see if that works, because it did work once. That's why I think you're seeing it more than anything, right? Because there is a big divide in society. There is a big divide in politics. So why did this all of a sudden end up in Congress? I think it's because of the Jewish influence inside these organizations.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you could be right. It is interesting to me, too, to see how I've joked for a while that the extreme left and extreme right will start making out once they realize they have a mutual hatred of Jewish people, but for very different reasons. Because I mean, the far right would typically kind of be more in line with that. Jews run politics, they run the banks, they do this, they're the ones oppressing us, and so on. But it's really interesting, the whole Jewish part with the left-wing narrative and why they can't support Jewish people, because Jewish people are a direct chink in their armor of the whole narrative that past oppression determines present socioeconomic stance.
Right, of course. Yeah, because they banded together and they flourish.
Yeah,
of course.
So this whole idea that, from slavery from 300 years ago is to result for all inner cities today can't coexist with the idea that Jews who haven't had a nation of their own, who have been enslaved as much as any other group in history, probably more, and persecuted just as much, and literally just had a Holocaust across Europe within the last century, yet they are still thriving and are hyper successful. Then it totally blows apart that whole narrative.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. That's good. I never really thought about that. Yeah. I feel like for me, like I don't really think about stuff like that in the sense that I don't really feel oppressed or have hate. I still feel like I can carve my own path if I put my mind to it. You know what I mean? I feel like I wish more people felt that way or thought that. It's not always working out well for me. Don't get me wrong. But I mean, that's just kind of how I process how my mind works. I don't really take the victimology mindset. I take the victor mindset. Like you put that phrase in my mind, which was helpful. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think this is good. I'll tell you why I think it's good. I think it's good because this is finally the separation between all of those organizations. It's the breakdown between the government, the media, the institutions, and the students. And we needed that to happen because this is what it used to be like 20 years ago. They used to be separated. It used to be the idealistic student holding the government to account. It was the idealistic student that was pushing for all the things that our government now is over pushing. But because there's this separation now, I think now both sides are going to identify, hey, we're not on the same team anymore, or we may not be on the next issue, whatever it may be. But now for students, they're going, fuck the government. You guys fucked us over once. You fucked our school up. Now, anytime an issue comes up, you're going to have this group of like idealistic contrarians, the way it used to be. So it's sort of a silver lining in a big mess. You know what I mean? So I kind of see like a good positive value in it.
Yeah. Hopefully the tides start turning. I think I've always seen things the flow of things a little bit differently because I look at education as essentially the hub that then people will go into these, what's happened over the last little bit and why I think these DEI and social justice policies are so widespread is because they've been baked into the idea of these students.
Right.
And then these students go off into media, they go off into government, they go off into entertainment, and then they just continue to disperse those ideas. So I look at the education as essentially the starting ground for all of that.
It is, but the thing is now it's breaking apart. So I think now,
which is good,
because you're seeing that, like there is always going to be a certain amount of indoctrination coming from the schools and how they mold the next generation. That's always going to happen. But I think because they're starting to question these woke policies, that this might be a turning point rather, where we start seeing people come out of these schools and these policies might start fading away, or at least a large enough group of people will start working in the opposite direction. So there may be a little more balance to the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So with any hope.
Right on. Well, anything else you wanted to add?
That's everything. Thanks, man.
Beautiful.
Right. Bye, everybody.